Russia obviously made many, I wouldn't say demands, I guess, but like Russia definitely was invested in controlling Ukrainian politics, and there's Ukraine was consistently trapped between Russian sphere of influence and Western sphere of influence. Anyway, now that I briefly talked about the inevitable collapse, let's get to Russia.
Trump has just announced that he has, with Vladimir Putin,
I gotta pee.
They covered issues on the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, but the concentration of that conversation was Ukraine. And Donald Trump said they discussed that they agreed they wanted to stop the war, stop the deaths in the Russia-Ukraine war. They have agreed to visit each other's nations. Trump has said he will call Zelensky in the very near future, and he said that he and Putin agreed to have respective teams start negotiations immediately. There you can see Donald Trump now posting on it. We both agreed we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine. And President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto. He says, common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. And he said we agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. So a highly significant moment. Donald Trump is wasting no time. He's been involved in the Middle East. He is now getting involved in Ukraine. Let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. And so, Dominic, it seems that the negotiations are going to get underway pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bombshell notification from Donald Trump from the White House following a bombshell speech by his defense secretary in Brussels. But just to reiterate, because it is very significant, Mark, is what he's saying here, saying that after this 1.5-hour phone call, we agreed to work together. He is saying, the American president agreeing with the Russian leader, very closely, including visiting each other's nations. And the Kremlin has, in the last 5 minutes or so, confirmed that Putin and Trump have agreed to meet. Not quite sure where, but there will be, it seems, another Trump-Putin summit. We've also agreed, the White House, or Donald Trump is saying there, to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. And this is the significant bit also. We will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation. So that's a break. You know, we have seen all day efforts by not just John Healey, the British Defence Secretary, but other members of NATO to kind of stick fingers in the dike, the crumbling dike of NATO solidarity and unity after what Pete Hegseth said, the Defence Secretary there, trying to give the impression that there is still unity, whereas that impression, as I say, is crumbling because it's a break with what has been 3 years of firm and determination by NATO members to be united and behind the principle of not talking about Ukraine. Nothing is discussed about Ukraine without Ukraine. So we now have a break with that. We have the American president meeting on the phone, talking for an hour and a half with his Russian counterpart, not including Ukraine, discussing Ukraine.
Putin will never allow Ukraine to join NATO, as he shouldn't. I mean, guys, America was never serious about Ukraine joining NATO. Other NATO nations were never serious about allowing Ukraine to join NATO. This is something that I've repeatedly talked about over and over again. Finally, for all the haters in the chat, admit Hasan was right. They're never going to admit that. Okay? Like, this was an inevitability because the war was what determines the outcome of Russia's unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine was always going to be what happens on the ground in the battlefield. Okay? For America, this was an advantageous position. They did not want Ukraine to fall into the sphere of Russian influence, as Russia obviously made many I wouldn't say demands, I guess, but like Russia definitely was invested in controlling Ukrainian politics, and there's Ukraine was consistently trapped between Russian sphere of influence and Western sphere of influence. Okay. And in terms of the Western sphere of influence, in terms of the Western, you thought Russia wouldn't invade Ukraine? Yeah, because I thought it would be a devastating predicament, which I was right about. I like that you're still pointing to this after history has shown time and time again that the numerous other instances where I said this is the opportunity to pull out and engage in ceasefire negotiations when leverage is in the hands. Like, this is the most leverage Zelensky will ever have. It's a great opportunity. It turns out I was right. It's not about whether I'm right or not, okay? So many people have died since then, and the inevitable outcome is still the same. It's crazy that 3 years in, you're still holding on to this insane thing. Now, listen, America's interest in Ukraine always was the same interest that we've had elsewhere, okay? Extraction of natural resources and forcing the government to basically privatize whatever key sectors they still controlled or regulated, okay, and buy it or forcibly sell it off to foreign investment for pennies on the dollar. Donald Trump's difference here, okay, well, you just said you were right when you were wrong, so of course people won't drop it. Wait, what? No, I admitted I was wrong instantly. I even apologized for it. What are you talking about? I'm stating that the analysis that led me to make this false prediction relied on me assuming that Vladimir Putin wasn't a f***ing madman. I think you're failing to understand how words work, okay? I can't understand how you can also come in here and still f***ing say this when everything else that I've said since then has basically become reality. There was no need for an apology, really, but I think I should have apologized once again for being super smarmy about my position. It's crazy. 14-year-old Twitch account, divorced father? Probably. Anyway, it's insane how much this comes up because it's like the one crumb they have over you being actually incorrect about something. I know. I think they were referring to how you said you were right about Ukraine not being in NATO, but that is correct. That was never a real thing. Anyway. Do you think Ukraine is in a worse position now that Syria has fallen? No, I think that Russia is in a worse position now, which sets the stage for Russia to concede on certain things. Syria was an important asset for it was basically a Russian naval base, like a warm water naval base for Russia. That was the reason why Russia offered protection to the Assad regime. Now that Syria has fallen, that definitely was devastating for Russia. That was not a good thing for Russia at all. Russia lost influence in the Middle East, not a large effect for its borders, though. No, I think that it's not just about influence in the Middle East. They kept a naval base in a deal with liberal Al-Qaeda. No, it doesn't matter. They still have it, but they pulled so many of their troops. And that base is never going to be in operation in the same way that it was when Assad was exclusively reliant on Russia for protection. Having to deal with the new HTS regime in Syria is an entirely different demon. Anyway, my point is they're blocking every vehicle from leaving and entering the base. I'm Syrian. Okay. How does Russia having a naval base in Syria even help them at all? I mean, Russia's climate is ultimately very cold. They needed, obviously, Sevastopol for entry point into the Black Sea, which is why they always retain Sevastopol and Crimea. But outside of that, you need warmer upkeep and maintenance. So Syria was their warm water port. It's also probably helpful for all of the Wagner operations or any kind of naval operations you do in the African continent too. I'm sure they'll look for alternative naval bases now if they haven't done so. I'm not entirely sure on Russian naval operations. I'm not up to date, but ultimately, Donald Trump once again did exactly what he has done so far. American foreign policy is uniparty. Donald Trump basically just says the quiet part out loud, where he said, yeah, we're going to continue defending Ukraine, but we want this to, come to an end. And in terms of like all of our defense that we've given to Ukraine thus far, we want your natural resources. You have $500 billion worth of natural resources that we want. The only difference between Donald Trump versus any other Democratic leadership is that Donald Trump basically says the quiet part out loud. One evidence to this is the continuation of the Trump era, the first Trump era policy with NATO. Donald Trump, much criticism was made of Donald Trump undermining the NATO allegiances, right? NATO is a protection racket. NATO is incredibly important for the American military-industrial complex. Donald Trump came in and was like, I'm anti-NATO. Everyone was like, oh my God, he's so based. He's an anti-imperialist. What is happening? Is he truly an isolationist? So many think pieces were written about it. What did Donald Trump do? All he said was European allies are going to give more of their own funds and beef up their own personal defense industries and pay more into NATO than what they do currently. What did Joe Biden do? He continued that policy. So clearly, it was not that big of an issue for the Democratic leadership. If it was, they would have reversed that decision. They never did. Donald Trump is back again, demanding more from European partners, okay? Saying they need to invest more into their own defense, okay? It's like in times where I guess the mafia is experiencing an economic downturn and their protection racket, they go back to the storefronts that they're quote unquote defending and turn around and say, you got to give me more money now. Okay. You got to give me more money now. You got to buy from my own providers even more now. Okay. It's a shakedown. That's what it is. It's not actually supposed to destroy NATO. Donald Trump is not an anti-imperialist or whatever. He's not anti-NATO. He can't be anti-NATO. NATO is very important for American global dominance, but also on top of that, NATO is very important for the military-industrial complex. Okay? So clearly, he is not going to deviate that far from, whatever the prior administration's policies were, because foreign policy always is uniparty. So basically, that's what's happening here as well. The only difference is Donald Trump will openly say insane shit, okay? And also simultaneously say the quiet part out loud. That's the major difference. Biden was never going to come out and be like, we want your natural resources, Jack. Well, Biden wasn't going to say anything. He would say, hubbubba, I did NATO and AUKUS. He would never turn around and be like, Zelensky, you got to give us your natural resources. The Finlandization of NATO. I NATOized Finland. That's what Biden would say. Okay? Not 100% accurate. NATO members agreed in 2014 to spend 2% of GDP on military spending. They hadn't, and Trump just made a fuss about it. Biden can't really reverse course back to noncompliance to an Obama-era treaty. I mean, that even proves my point further, though, don't you think? That it's uniparty. So it's a 2014 era policy that Biden actually, that Trump actually enforced. And he now wants to increase that individual expenditure of European countries or NATO alliance countries. So, it was basically a continuation of that. Yeah. They're agreeing with you, Law. No, I know. Well, sometimes that chatter is not always in agreement with me. This is one of those instances where he is. Anyway.
Ukraine, but not including Ukraine. And only after that meeting, they're going to phone Zelensky and inform him about that meeting. That's significant. And also, I think the question that arises out of this immediately is when he says we've instructed our teams to start negotiations. What teams are those? Are these going to be bilateral negotiations between America? Is he talking about his team, the Americans and the Russians, discussing Ukraine's fate? Or is that going to include Ukraine? A lot of questions out of this, of course. And we've heard from the Kremlin already. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, confirmed the call happened and saying they discussed issues relating to the exchange. The American side, he says it will fulfill all agreements reached related to the exchange. So the Americans seem to have made, Donald Trump seems to have made commitments in that phone call with Vladimir Putin that the Russians expect him to hold himself to. What are those commitments?
Would Zelensky even agree to any deal that doesn't offer future security, such as joining NATO? Yeah, dude, yes. What do you mean? I can't. I tried to explain this for the past 3 years to a lot of chatters who did not understand what I was saying whenever I said, Ukraine has no choice in this matter, okay? Autonomy for Ukrainians is simply a thing that the Democratic Party presented in an effort to say, no, we're doing this for Ukraine. When the real reasons why they were doing this, beefing up support for Ukraine, was not because of the morality of the situation, although Ukrainians are on the right side, okay, morally. They are the ones that are invaded, obviously, and it's understandable to not want to be fucking invaded. The American government's interest in Ukraine had nothing to do with morals. The American government does not operate on a moral boundary, okay? They don't care about the morality of a situation. I mean, look at Israel. Obviously, they don't give a shit, okay? It's the exact reverse, if not worse, dynamic, and America is completely on board, okay? No government actually cares about morals when they're making foreign policy, when they're setting their foreign policy agenda. America's interests in Ukraine were, as Trump has also correctly pointed to, openly pointed to, natural resources, extraction of natural resources, and also the privatization of government sectors that can be sold off to foreign capital. Okay? And they have done that already. And also, simultaneously, while they're doing that, that is what they always wanted. But beyond that, they also wanted to use Ukraine as a fantastic opportunity to undermine a foreign adversary's military while dumping off old refurbished weapon systems, while also testing new weapon systems in a battlefield, okay, for improving their procurement strategies, dumping off their old weapons, so that the military-industrial complex could turn around and say, "Hey, we need more money. Look at our munitions. We're depleted." It's a win-win-win for American military-industrial complex and American profiteers in general. The people that obviously lose are the Ukrainian population, as always. And it's not like this was hidden. They openly, Warren and Lindsey Graham, have time and time again routinely admitted that Ukraine was incredibly beneficial for American interests. For 5% of our military budget, we were able to undermine the foreign adversary's military by 50% without a single American soldier dying in the process. I'd say that's a good bargain. That's what Lindsey Graham said in between talking about Israel. Okay, Elizabeth Warren said that too. Anyone that is involved in any way, shape, or form with foreign policy openly recognized what the truth was. It was never about actually allowing Ukraine to be a part of NATO or anything like that. That was just a way to sell the concept. Is helping Ukraine in military capacity, sending weapons, etc., the wrong move? We're talking about the interests of the Ukrainian people. I feel like it's better to just not be involved in a war as another country. Wait, what? Dude, I don't know. I don't think you understand what I'm stating. If the goal is not to actually, free Ukraine from Russian invasion, if the goal is to just simply keep dumping weapons until it gets to a point where Ukraine can no longer fight back because they just simply don't have the manpower, okay, because they're running out of humans to hold the guns and hold the weapons, and also you're slow releasing those weapons anyway in a way where you are allowing the Ukrainian military to atrophy throughout this process in the fucking meat grinder where they're doing trench warfare, okay, then you're never going to say to Zelensky that they need to actually nip this in the bud and to come to the table and get to an agreement. Okay? That's where the ultimate purpose of, or the ultimate goals of America matter most.
Let's just remind you of our breaking news this evening, and in the past half an hour, Donald Trump has confirmed he's had a phone call with President Putin in which they discussed the war in Ukraine. Let's speak now to our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Ben.
Like, the only reason why this is quote unquote coming to a close, and I don't know what will actually end up happening, okay, but the only reason why this is technically supposedly coming to a close is that that finalization is inevitable due to the battlefield, okay? Due to what is going on. Isn't Ukrainian society full of Nazis? Why should we care what happens to the country? No, that is not the case. And holy shit, dude. Jesus Christ. What are you? Are you a Russian propagandist? Like, what are you talking about? The denazification argument was never actually a real one, okay? That was never an argument that I entertained. Are you watching my fucking haters and thinking that that is my perspective? When I have spent hours and hours and hours talking about how the denazification argument was a ridiculous one. As a matter of fact, the only thing you end up doing, and if you want to understand if you want to understand what I think will happen in Ukrainian politics in general, I think that things are going to get much worse. Okay? I think that Zelensky will probably be seen as an ineffective leader that sold off the country, and that much more rabid ultranationalists will inevitably seize control over the entirety of the nation, and that Ukraine will be infinitely more right-wing than it was in this process. You might even get fucking assassinated. When you invade a country, ironically enough, a lot of people forget this aspect of my bad prediction. Something that I mentioned time and time again in the buildup to Russia invading Ukraine, something that I kept mentioning over and over again was how ridiculous the denazification argument was. Okay, every country has Nazis in their military, every single one. Okay, this is not a real argument. You can't be like, oh, we got to denazify. That's why we have to invade. You want to know why? As I stated time and time again, when you actually invade a country whose entire national mythos is built around not being a part of the country that is invading the country, Russia, whether it be the USSR or not, then yeah, all of the most rugged, all of the worst fucking Nazis are now going to be seen as liberators. Okay? You actually never denazify a country by invading them. You Nazify the country by invading them. Okay? And that's precisely what ended up happening. I mean, that is literally what ended up happening. All the people inside of Ukraine that previously were duking it out on the streets with football hooligans and paramilitaries that became the Azov Battalion or whatever the fuck ended up fighting alongside them. Because why wouldn't they? Because now you have a much larger problem at hand. Of course you're going to end up aligning with the people that you previously fought for, or the people that you previously fought against. That's it. So yes, of course the country, after being invaded, is inevitably going to become more right-wing and more reactionary. Okay? Also, speaking of which, you obviously have Nazi fascists on the Russian side as well. So that's another ridiculous argument. Anyway, Donald Trump has also said that I'm okay with that. Trump says that taking of Ukraine's membership in NATO off the table, I don't think it's practical. He says he knows Hegseth made a statement today saying that he thinks it's unlikely or impractical. I think that's probably true. U.S. will still send aid to Ukraine, but we want it secure, Trump said. All right, let's get to some of the analysis. Let's talk about what's going on, and it'll give you more of my thoughts on this issue.
And Ivor, we've heard from Donald Trump, of course. What is the Kremlin making of this? I see, as I speak to you, that they've just issued a statement. Do you have that statement?
I do, Mark, yes. They have confirmed that this call has taken place, which is the first time they have confirmed there has been any kind of concrete contact between the two sides. And it is from the Kremlin that we've heard that the call lasted nearly an hour and a half, which is really quite significant. The statement has come from the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. He has said a phone call between President Putin and US President Donald Trump has recently concluded. It was a very long telephone conversation. It lasted almost an hour and a half. He said that they discussed a number of topics, principally the exchange of Russian and US citizens. Yesterday, of course, was the start of that, with this former school teacher, Mark Fogel, leaving Russia with Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, after a surprise secret visit from him to the Russian capital. And we understand that a Russian national is on their way back to Russia, but that still hasn't been confirmed by the Kremlin. That wasn't confirmed in this statement. But Mr. Peskov went on to say that the US president assured the American side would fulfill all the reached agreements, which by that he means, of course, that he believes that the Russian prisoner in the US will indeed be released. Now, on the key topic of Ukraine and peace negotiations, Mr. Peskov said that President Trump spoke in favor of the rapid cessation of hostilities and the solution of problems through peaceful means. President Putin, for his part, mentioned the need to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and agreed with Trump that a long-term settlement can be achieved through peaceful negotiations. I think one thing that really sticks out in this statement, I'm just reading it for the first time now, at the bottom it says, the Russian president invited the US president to visit Moscow and expressed readiness to receive American officials in Russia regarding areas of mutual interest, including...
I will once again reiterate the position that I maintained throughout the entirety of the Biden administration. The notion that you would never actually talk to Vladimir Putin, the notion that you would never actually force Vladimir Putin and China to the negotiation table was a fucking idiotic one. And it was also a lie anyway. They literally did negotiate with Vladimir Putin when they talked about hostages. They literally did that. They did. The idea that they were never going because they're evil, and Vladimir Putin is fucking evil, all right? Make no mistake. I'm not saying he's a good guy at all. But the idea that they were never going to come to the table and have a conversation was fucking insane. It's insane. Foreign policy demon, by the way. Mr. Foreign Policy. So awesome.
Including the topic of Ukrainian settlement. Now, this would be really quite something if Donald Trump, a sitting US president, came to Russia given every...
But what do you want the West to do, though? I get their motives are crooked. So what then? I mean, there are multiple different exit ramps that could have been enforced time and time again before coming into any sort of invasion, okay? Whether it be the continuation of the Minsk agreements and the enforcement of the Minsk agreements with a unilateral commission designed to make sure that the Minsk agreements were actually being followed through. That would have been great, okay? That would have been incredible. That would have been the number one thing to do. Now it's like, when you think about it, when you go all the way back to the Minsk agreements, when you go all the way back to that, okay, and you think about what Russia was, what Russia was stating in the Minsk agreements, that seems like a fantastic opportunity. Now it seems like it would never happen, because that would mean all of the annexed land that Russia took over in eastern Ukraine would be given back to Ukraine, and that LPR and DPR would be seen as autonomous regions that are still firmly within the Ukrainian national boundary that would still allow Russia to have interference in Ukrainian political affairs. That was the major reason as to why the Ukrainian side, or the Western interests in terms of like following the Minsk agreements, never held up, because they were like, that's ridiculous. We don't want that shit, because then that would mean Russia has influence over Ukrainian politics. Okay, that's it. That was the initial thing way before the invasion. Okay. That's under the impression that Russians actually wanted Minsk to hold. It's a failure that was needed pretext of further capturing Ukrainian territory, which Putin sees all of it as his. Yes, this part is correct. Putin does see all of Ukraine as his. But there's two different ways of going about it, okay? I am inclined to believe Vladimir Putin when he says Ukraine is Russia, okay? I'm inclined to believe him. He says it in the same exact way that Israel talks about Palestine and Palestinians. He said it to Tucker Carlson, and he said it time and time again, okay? Having said that, however, there are two different ways that any country can go about this. And the other way that they were trying to go about this was to maintain influence within Ukrainian politics and bring Ukraine into the sphere of Russian influence as a border state that still creates a buffer zone between NATO and Russia. Okay, this is definitely going to get clip law. Wait, what? I'm not saying anything that is bad. What are you guys talking about? I'm inclined to believe that he means it when he says Ukraine is Russian. Ukraine is Russian territory. Now, you can either try to forcibly take over Ukraine like he did and failed to do so, or you can try to bring Ukraine into the sphere of Russian influence by manipulating Ukrainian politics to the best of your ability with two autonomous states comprised of what Vladimir Putin claims is ethnic Russians. You said I'm inclined to believe Vladimir Putin when he says Ukraine is Russia, but it was obvious what you meant in context. Yes, he believes it. I'm inclined to believe him when he says that he believes it. Okay? Like, as in, I think that that is his main motivation. Do I agree with it? No, of course not. Anyway, having said that, however, your takes are awful on this, man. Don't say my takes are awful. Tell me what is wrong with it, okay? Explain to me what is wrong with the takes. Just saying bad take is not dissent, okay? Please. In any case, what happened to your W banner? Oh, here. Sorry, I turned off my banner yesterday because it was messed up. I don't know why. In any case, hold on. Then once Russia invaded Ukraine and went all the way to Kyiv and got pushed back due to a lot of support and a lot of defense from Western nations, NATO nations specifically, okay, pushing back gave Zelensky some, okay, then the 15-point Antalya plan came through in that process. That negotiation was the highest level of leverage that Ukraine had. And their leverage since then has only diminished as Russian forces have been able to successfully push further and further into eastern Ukrainian territory and forcibly annexed and mined the entirety of the territory and hardened their defenses in the entirety of the territory that they took over. Okay? At that point, that was an exit ramp. And I gave credit to Zelensky as well in terms of the way that he wanted to bargain. Okay, dude, people aren't going to give up their land. Imagine if some country took over 30% of Turkey, you'd be on the front lines. You are delusional if you think that I would do that. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I understand that. I do. I understand what you're saying. I wouldn't fight for Turkey if some country decided to take 30% of Turkey, but that part is ridiculous. But I understand why people would. I understand why people would fight to rid their national boundaries of invaders. Okay? The problem is, what happens when you run out of people? The dynamic between Israel, Palestine versus Russia and Ukraine have a lot of similarities. Russia is an irredentist force that is forcibly taking over land and violating the sovereignty of a nation state. Okay? Israel is the settler colony that is dominating the indigenous population. But one key aspect of this is that we control all the cards in terms of what Israel can and can't do. We do not control all the cards in terms of what Russia can and can't do. All we can do is try to force Russia to incur penalties for invading Ukraine. Do you understand? So the negotiation process is entirely different. That's it. That's simply my position. Okay? We have virtually, we can tell Israel to stop tomorrow and they would be forced to stop. We can't tell Russia to stop because Russia is a foreign adversary. Its entire economy and its entire statehood relies on being outside of the American sphere of influence. There's still leverage, and America has pulled on those points of leverage to the best of their ability. But of course, we don't have the same level of control over Russia as we do over Israel. So the dynamic is different in terms of how you negotiate.
Everything that's happened in the last decade, really, since Russia.
Yo, all of y'all are brain rot getting your info from this goon. I'm out. TC Hasan.
Annexed Crimea. The last.
Nah, you only defend Russia because you're a communist like Putin? Yeah, exactly. Vladimir Putin is definitely a communist and not an authoritarian kleptocrat who is very much a capitalist. And yeah, I'm certainly defending Vladimir Putin.
Last US president to visit Moscow, visit Russia, was Barack Obama in 2013, and that was for a G20 summit. So that would really be quite something. And President Trump, in his statement, actually said that I think he reciprocated. I think he also extended an invitation to Vladimir Putin. Let's see if that happens. I think that would that's quite some way off. But clearly, already we've actually seen some an American official here in Moscow. That was Steve Witkoff yesterday, to arrange this prisoner release, the start, it seems, or the first piece of the puzzle in this wider negotiation over Ukraine. And the starting gun clearly has now been fired with this very lengthy phone call between these two leaders. And it seems like the first of many.
Yeah, and one of the bits that sticks out for me...
What should the West do? Force every party involved in this, including China, to the negotiations table and set up a treaty for permanent security. That's what America should have done from the jump. But considering that our goals were not actually to stop Ukrainians from dying, and our goals were to simply give them older weapons, a slow process of sending our older weapons to Ukraine, and maybe test out some new ones as well, experimental technology too. We didn't want that at all. A treaty with Russia, yeah, okay, bro, that's useful. I will never stop maintaining the position that all wars end with treaties, okay? That's how war ends. That's it. And the best possible moment to push for a treaty is when your side has the highest leverage, the highest amount of leverage, okay? No, it ends with people actually, choosing to stop fighting. Oh my God. Okay. You don't push for a treaty when all of your manpower is dead. You're forced into it when all of your manpower is dead. When you have the highest level, of leverage, you go into the table and you say, "Here, we're going to put a stop on this. We're going to implement a ceasefire." Even if neither party is truly interested in a cessation of hostilities. I've maintained the position over and over again that even if Russia were to not follow through on their side of the bargain, you're still back to square one. You're still in a defensive posture. You still engage in military action. But that's what you've been doing anyway. Iran treaty was useful, right? With USA, not even Russia. What? The Iran denuclearization agreement was an incredible achievement. What are you talking about? Do you think I'm anti-Iran denuclearization agreement? If America had actually followed through on their side, yes, we broke that treaty. Iran didn't. Donald Trump very famously broke that treaty. Are you in favor of Donald Trump's actions in throwing aside the Iran denuclearization agreement? What are you talking about? It was probably one of Barack Obama's best foreign policy accomplishments, aside from normalizing relations with Cuba. Donald Trump ruined both. Anyway.
Is where Putin says in this statement, or Peskov says in the statement about Putin, that for his part, he mentioned the need to eliminate the root causes of the conflict. Now that, for Vladimir Putin, of course, can mean many things.
Yeah, for Vladimir Putin, according to him, the root causes of this conflict is not Russia invading Ukraine. It's not Moscow's aggression. He has always claimed in the last 3 years that it's NATO's fault. It's NATO's historical eastward expansion that forced Russia's hand, in his terms, to fight a defensive war. That's how it's portrayed here, and it has been for the last 3 years. They've built this narrative around the war to claim that the West is the aggressor, Russia is the innocent victim here. And clearly he's setting out the stall there once again, ensuring that this is how these peace negotiations are viewed here in Russia. Because I think this is really interesting, actually, because when Vladimir Putin launched this so-called special military operation, which is how the war in Ukraine is still called here in Moscow, it's still presented as that. It's not called a war. It was supposed to be over in a matter of weeks, of course. It was supposed to be an outright victory. Peace negotiations, a negotiated settlement, is not how it was supposed to end, and yet that is not how it's being portrayed here in Russia. It's very much still being presented as that victory will be Russia's. You see all around Moscow these big signs saying victory will be ours, and I think no matter what happens in these negotiations, Russia will, of course, I think, even if they do get a more favourable deal, I'm sure they'll have to give up something and make some concessions. But I think no matter what kind of concessions, they will want to spin it as a victory over Ukraine.
Yes, both sides will spin their end of the bargain as a major W. Of course, this is politics. Russia will be like, oh my God, we did a fucking amazing job. We killed so many people. So many of our people died for the grayest land that is now also mined into oblivion anyway. It's like unusable farmland, but it's fantastic. It's a great W for us. Of course they're going to say that.
Over the collective West. And you get a sense of that from that statement there, that Vladimir Putin is minded to, for his part, to eliminate the root causes of the conflict, and agreed with Trump that a long-term settlement.
So killing people is a success to you? Do you think I agree with this? Wait, what? Why can't you admit that Trump is great at foreign policy? I love that chatter. He's just, that guy has no opinions, okay? Just throwing shit at the wall, seeing what sticks.
Can be achieved. He seems to be conflating these two ideas, that a long-term settlement will mean a victory for Russia because he's got NATO to back off.
Yes, and to what extent we've been hearing about this swap of prisoners, and we heard a bit more about it from the Russian side today. To what extent has this kind of exchange of prisoners, which we didn't know was going to happen, or I don't think we knew was going to happen, to what extent has that sort of paved the way for the phone call even?
Yeah, I think it seems this was crucial to get the ball rolling, the first piece of the puzzle. The American who has left Russia, who's
half the breadbasket of Europe and resources worth $10 trillion, just gray land. I mean, I'm talking about after Russia is done bombing it into oblivion and also putting mines, like landmines, mining it and bombing it into oblivion.
Who's been released from Russian prison, Mark Fogel. He was this former school teacher. I think Donald Trump clearly has identified that as something he needs to do first, to buy some kind of political capital, increases political capital at home, because this was someone who missed out on that wider prisoner swap back in August, when dozens of prisoners, both in Russia and the West, were released, the biggest prisoner swap since the end of the Cold War. His family at the time were absolutely furious that he wasn't included, calling it a glaring injustice. And of course, now Donald Trump has got him released. And I think that was clearly a very important point to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, this is also another aspect of this. It's so funny how Russia is claiming they got NATO to back off when 2 new countries joined NATO. Like previously, those 2 countries had a neutrality handshake, okay? A neutrality handshake agreement. Now they're a part of NATO, okay? And on top of that, it's not like Ukraine was ever going to join NATO anyway, in the eyes of the NATO nations, which is a reality that they mention time and time again, even though a lot of people refuse to reckon with that reality. So ultimately, this wasn't a massive fucking W for Russia at all. Russia was able to show the world that, one, NATO is still very important, okay? Russia was able to basically deliver a gift to America in terms of how multipolarity is actually a devastating bargain for many of the countries that are currently under the security blanket of the United States of America. They reaffirmed their position to American empire and American dominance, while also simultaneously showing that they didn't have the military capabilities of overtaking Ukraine. So they showcased themselves as a paper tiger simultaneously, while showing the rest of the world that it's awesome to be under the security blanket of the United States of America. You probably put, in my estimation, okay, you probably put, you gave a lifeline to American security operations by at least another decade, if not 2 decades. Now, they still have nukes, obviously, which is the one thing that has stopped America from being fully involved in Ukraine, but it's done. You had the opportunity to continue engaging in trade and using the dominance that you have in terms of energy. That's the same thing you said at the time before they invaded. Yes, I did say this before they invaded as well, but it didn't fucking matter. Nobody listens to any of the... You can pick apart what I'm saying and present it as though I'm arguing for the exact opposite position that I'm arguing for. Saw brief snippets of like the Willie Mack show and many other Hasan Loves Russia videos that were made at the time. I was wondering why the fuck people thought that I was pro-Russia. It turns out it's because they clipped my argument that I was making against Russia and presented it as though I was pro-Russia. Why is your audio cancer? Is it? Is there an issue with my audio right now? I'm confused. You are Delulu. Do you know that Putin died and now is just a clone? They could have taken whole Ukraine in a few months if they wanted to. Yeah, they definitely didn't want to take the entirety of Ukraine. That's what happened. That's definitely what happened. You're right.